Hey guys, I am setting up a recording here to walk you guys through the process of using Flexbox to create your multi-column website layouts. So let me just kind of take a moment and kind of, I guess, break down what I have going on here real quick. I have got a basic HTML document. This comes from the starter page that we've worked with many times this semester. And what I've done so far is just create a style sheet that I'm naming style CSS. You can see there's actually nothing inside of here at this point. And I've linked to it. So really, not a lot happening here right now. I also have got a browser window open where I've opened that I can use to refresh this to show you guys what it's going to look like. I'm going to be building a basic 3-column website for you or example for you. And then what I'd like to do is build some modifications on that. Looking at several of the wireframes that you guys have here, I wrote down, 6 of them that I think have good examples that I can build for you guys that I think will help more than just the one student that I'm opening and working with the wireframe. Lastly, I have a tab here open that has the video that I posted last week or maybe 2 weeks ago in our D2L class, the Learn Flexbox in 15 Minutes. This is an excellent resource. I put it in there for a reason. It walks through all of the options that Flexbox has to offer. I'm really going to be focusing on the 2 most valuable ones here today. We're going to talk about setting up a Flex display, as well as how to position containers or columns within other containers. That's really where the focus is going to be today. But I just wanted to remind you guys of that. If you want to dig in further, it's a wonderful video, and you can reference that if you're looking for a little bit more of an in-depth thing compared to what I'm making here right now. So I'm going to jump into Visual Studio, and I'm going to be working in the body here to begin with. And basically what I'm going to set up is a really simple 3-column example. Whether you're doing 2 columns, 3 columns, 4 columns, this example will show you exactly how that's done. This is always done by first setting up a container that we put the columns inside of, okay? That's really the key difference to working with Flexbox compared to what you did before, where we just had the one big column, okay? So the column, or I should say the container that I'm going to make right now is going to be a div, and I'm going to give that a class. And we're going to go ahead and let's call this thing, let's call it container, or maybe container 1. And in there, inside of there, I'm going to put 3 more divs. These will be what we'll refer to as children or child divs. They're nothing different than a normal one. This is just basic like programming terminology. That the parent is the thing that would hold the children. Again, there's nothing different though in terms of code to what you guys have done already. So I'm going to go ahead and call this one maybe column 1. And inside of it, we'll go ahead and we'll type column 1 so we can just see that when we preview the page. I'm going to type that out. Now, let's do that. All right, and I'll just copy that and we'll paste it a few times to get our other columns. Now, right now, they're not going to display as columns. They're going to display as rows, and I will show you how to make that happen in our style sheet. So that's the basic HTML code right there. Again, we've got an opening container, closes right here on line 16, and we've got 3 children divs inside of there. Now, we haven't styled it yet at all, so this isn't going to look like much. Let's take a look at it in the browser. If I refresh here, you will see that here are the individual containers. They are stacking on top of each other as rows, as basic HTML does. And the one thing you can't see here yet is that these actually extend all the way to the end of the browser window. I am realizing right now I've got a low battery. I'm going to need to plug this laptop in, or I'm going to lose you all. So give me a moment to make that happen.
Where is it?
I got it in my bag. Halfway through building this. All right. Let's make this happen. All right. We're back. We're not back. Hang on a second. Oh, all right. Let's see. Laptop doesn't think it's charging. Let's see. There we go. Okay. All right. Pardon the interruption. Okay. So let's do some basic styling so we can actually see these things. So I am going to actually, these are all divs right now, so that we can actually see them. I'm just going to make a very, very basic style here where I'm going to ask all of my divs to have a border so we can see things. This is not something you have to do in your project. This is something I'm doing so that you can simply see these things. So I'm going to add a border. It's going to be 1 pixel. It's going to be black, and it's going to be solid. Actually, I don't need those commas. Let's get those out of there. All right, cool. So if I save that and I test this out in the browser now, you can see that all of my divs now have those borders. So let's get a few things happening here for us to kind of treat this as if it were your own project. So we don't have a wrapper at this point. So I'll maybe do that in an example, on a later example here, but I am going to go ahead and tell my container, my parent container here, to have a width so that at least so that's a class, so it has to start with a dot, right? All classes start with a period. Let's go ahead and give it a width. I'm going to make that width 960 pixels. And now the parent div is 960 pixels, so the children divs are that same width as well. But we're actually going to give those children divs their own individual widths as well here. So that's going to be column 1, column 2, column 3. And we'll go ahead and set those up here as well. Again, those are classes. They start with a period in your CSS. And we'll go ahead and make the width. Let's just do something easier, like 300 pixel width on these. And I will do that for all of them. So got column 1 set up, column 2 set up, and column 3 set up here as well. So now all 3 of those have a width. And if we head back again to the browser and we refresh, you should see that the parent div, container 1, you can see its border. Column 1, 2, and 3, you can see their borders, and you can see that they now have a width of 300 pixels. Okay, we've got the base pieces in place. Everything we've done really up until this point, though, isn't really new. This is all using code you guys have used up at this point. So let's actually now start working with some new things. First of all, let's get these rows to start acting like columns. Remember, these are box elements, or what are referred to as box elements. Box elements by default in HTML, they stack one on top of one another. By default, that's just how they act. To get them to break away from that, we need to change the way that they display. And we'll do that by adding some code to the parent container here, that being container 1. Okay, so this is how easy it is to actually implement some Flexbox. So I'm doing this to the parent container, container 1, and we're going to set the display property, and the value that we're going to give it is flex. This is how we implement Flexbox with us. In fact, any other Flexbox that I might decide to use in any of these children will not work unless I first set the display of the parent container to flex. Now that we've got that, let's head back to the browser again. And again, let's refresh and notice how all of a sudden they're acting like columns, okay? And that they're stacking up. So now that you've seen how that works, let's talk about then distributing them within that parent container. There's really 2 different mechanisms we can use to do this. I'll start with the first one, the one that you guys really know already. That would be using margins. Now, we talked about this before, but it's worth remembering that when we position things based on a margin, we do so based on the left margin. The left side of the browser window is the constant. It's always going to be displaying on the page versus the right. We don't have really any control whether somebody like, pushes the browser window over like I'm doing now, or shrinks the browser window to a different size. But that left-hand side is always present. It's the constant. So one way that we could do this is by using left margins, or margin dash left. So I could begin to position these individual containers based on exact values if I wanted to. Like maybe I want the column 1 to push over 10 pixels. In fact, maybe I want column 2 and 3 to do the same thing. Okay. They don't have to all be equal values. We could vary that, but this will be a nice example to show you. So if we refresh our browser, you can see that now each one of those columns has 10 pixels of margin on their left-hand side. Okay. And we could potentially do the math and figure out exactly what to set those left margins to, or we could let Flexbox do that math for us, which is really advantageous, because then if we end up changing the size of these columns later, Flexbox will adjust and do the math again for us. We won't have to keep going back and changing each of those 3 lines of code. We can just go and change 1 line of code. So it's just a much more efficient way to work. So I'm going to take out these margin lefts. And in their place, I'm going to distribute these in a different way. I'm going to do this again by talking to the parent container. I'm going to show you guys a few different variations on this. We're going to end up using the property that's called justify content. Remember, in CSS, anytime you have more than 1 word, those words are always separated by a dash. So justify content. One thing that we can do, I'll show you this one. You can center things this way inside of a container. In this manner, all 3 of our columns are now centered, and the space on the right and the left of the parent is equal. Some other things that we can do, this is my favorite way to work with stuff, is instead of working where it says centered, we can set it to space dash between. What this is going to do is it's going to take the first and last column and left and right align them, and it's going to center the middle one perfectly for us based on how much space is left. Now, there's another variation on this as well. If you do want space at the beginning and the end, like maybe you've got 3 call to actions and you want them all to basically be equally centered, you can do that with, what is that, space around. And if we try that and we give it a look, there we go. So now we have equal space before the first column, in between the next 2, and then they're at the end. So those are like the more common ones. We'll end up using those a lot here in this this example today. Space between, space around. I'm going to go ahead though and set that back to space between. And let's maybe talk about some things that are a little bit more specific to building an actual website. So I'm going to take a moment and just get a few other elements in place here. For example, in your real website, inevitably you will have a wrapper that's going to surround everything. Let's give it a class. We'll call that class wrapper. And I'm going to go ahead and put the closing tag for that wrapper at the bottom here. All right, and again, I do like to align those, so bear with me while I get a couple of things short up here from an alignment standpoint. Cool, so I'm going to go ahead then and set my wrapper up in the CSS. So let's see here. So my container, I'm not even going to worry about giving it a width anymore. Rather, I am going to come over here and set up my wrapper, and I'll center that, and I'll set its width there. So let's see here. So we want to set our margin to auto. That's going to center our wrapper. And let's go ahead and give it a width of 960 pixels. Okay, cool. All right, let's give that a quick look. There we go. So now the wrapper is in place. And of course, the wrapper is centered. So as I increase or decrease the size of the browser window, it will always remain centered for us. All right, that should give us a good starting point. Let's take a look at some of these wireframes. Let's see. Jacob, you had a couple of things in your wireframe that I thought are worth potentially talking about. No, my bad. Kyle. Jacobs, you had like a single column layout. Kyle, you have some things happening here that I'd love to talk about. I'd love to talk about setting up nav like this. Not that we necessarily have to, but there were a good number of you that have a logo and then you had your navigation. We can also talk about setting up some stuff like we have here, like basically these 2-column layouts. If you want these to be aligned like this is actually going to be a row, another row, and yet another row. And in each one of those 3 rows, we would have 2 columns. That's going to ensure that our grid stays really nice and even. And again, I'll show you how we set that up. It's pretty straightforward. But why don't we actually go ahead and do, actually, we'll start with what we have, and I'll modify it to basically build this type of a layout. Because that'll be the easiest thing I think to start with. So in this case, what we had here in, let's see, what we had was 2 columns. So I'm just going to take out my 3rd column like so and save that. Let's take a look at what that looks like in our style, or sorry, in our browser. There we go. Now this is also based on the fact that these 2 columns are already set to 300 pixels wide. Okay, it looks like in this example here that they are definitely much smaller than 300, and that we've actually got space on the left, in the middle, and on the right. So we can make all of those things happen here by first of all changing this from space between to space around. Right, that gives us that space on the beginning, middle, and end. And then maybe we've got slightly larger, columns here. So maybe we make this guy like 450, make this one 450. And then we can, again, jump on over to the browser, take a look at our example. There we go. Yeah, maybe 450 is a little bit large. Kind of seems like we don't have a ton of space at the beginning there. So I don't know, maybe we do like 400. That'll give us plenty of room. All right, one last quick check on that. There we go, that's looking good. Cool. So another thing that we can do, because potentially what we want to do is we want to start repeating this now, that parent container with its children. It may make sense, rather than calling this thing like container 1, maybe we just end up calling this, in this example, we could call it row, or something. I mean, I think actually I'll keep it with it being called container 1. And what we'll do here is I'm just essentially going to paste that 2 more times. Because again, what I'm replicating here is the fact that here we've got a, we've got 2 columns sitting next to each other, another 2 columns sitting next to each other, and another 2 columns sitting next to each other. So potentially here, I'm going to mimic what we're seeing again. That was some text that was in there. We could put some lorem ipsum or something in there, but for now that'll work. And this was an image. So we could, obviously we know how to put images into divs at this point. I'm just going to put some text in there though, as an example. And that's how we build something out like this. Each one of these, let's take a look at it in the browser. Each one of these now, there we go. There are our containers. Now, obviously, they're not as tall as what we saw in the wireframe because we don't have stuff in there yet. But if we plugged a paragraph worth of type into each of these, those containers will naturally come down in size. Same thing if we put images in these. Those containers, the height will adjust to fit the content that goes inside of there. Okay, so that's how we end up setting up these. Now, for the wireframe assignment this week, this is how your wireframe is going to look. They're not going to be as tall as the actual wireframe that you designed in Photoshop or Illustrator. Okay, because we're not adding heights to these yet. We're going to let the content drive the height. But there's another interesting thing here that's happening in this that I'd love to talk about, and that is the navigation. We can absolutely use Flexbox to get the logo and the navigation to sit next to each other like we're seeing here, okay? So what we're gonna do is, let's build out an example of navigation. Now, this isn't necessarily for all of you, but most of you, I do believe, have a left-hand like aligned logo, and then you know, a list of navigation. So we'll do this. We'll start with the traditional way, just building a nav container for our navigation. In there, I'm going to go ahead and actually make a div that would potentially end up holding the logo. I don't have an image for a logo now, but that's okay. We can just use some text. And then obviously it could get replaced by an image when we start the design phase. Now for the navigation, we would do this with an unordered list. So it's been a minute since we talked about unordered lists, but that's going to use the UL tags. And then each of the links is going to go inside of a list item. So LI tag, and I'm just going to go ahead and type sort of generic here, link. And let's get those in place. So we'll do like 5 of them. Okay. So navigation is the parent container that holds a div that holds the logo. And then we've got our links here put inside of list items. Now, these are block items. So they are going to, by default, display one on top of each other. Let's take a look at what that looks like as a reminder. Sure enough, there's our logo. It goes all the way to the end. Here's our links. They're all stacked up one on top of one another. So let's get those under control. Let's start with the logo container. And let's go ahead and give that like a, you know, some definition here. So logo, I'm going to go ahead and give it a width to begin with. And that width, let's just say maybe it's, I don't know, 200 pixels wide, for example. Okay. And that the actual logo width would be determined by the width of the actual graphic when it gets plugged in. After that, we've got our list to take care of next. So the list items, to get them to display horizontally rather than vertically, we're going to change the display on that. And the display on those to display in a line is inline. Let's save that. Let's give it a look and refresh. Okay, we're getting there, right? The logo is looking good. The links are looking good. Looks like I misspelled the word link. But now they are not aligned next to each other yet. So again, let's make that happen. That's going to happen by, again, using Flexbox. The parent container, let's go back to Rexel one more time. The parent container for the logo and the links is the nav container. So let's make that happen here. Let's go into our CSS. Let's define our nav. Let me do that right up here above these things. So nav, and we're going to go ahead and set the nav's display to flex. Flex is what sets up the children to display as columns. So we save that. Come on back over here. We give it a refresh, and we're looking good. Now, obviously, we could put some margins, you know, top margins potentially on these individual containers. That might be another thing to kind of get this looking a little bit closer to what we're seeing here, because there is obviously some space at the tops of all of these. That would be easy enough, again, to do in our style sheet. Potentially here on the individual columns, I could go ahead and do like let's do a top, I'm sorry, a margin top. We don't do margin bottoms, guys, remember, margin tops. So maybe I do like, I don't know, 50 pixels on that. I'm going to do the same thing here, maybe even the same thing on the container, so it separates from the navigation a little bit. And we'll save that, and that should start to space some stuff out. There we go. Cool. All right. And that is looking good. I mean, other than potentially having a footer put in here, this is exactly where the wireframes should be for next week. So why don't we go ahead and we'll put a footer in there as well, just to kind of round this out. So we'll do a footer, and we'll put footer stuff in there. And we'll refresh. And it looks like that's outside of my wrapper. So, good that you guys are seeing that. It's a small, easy tweak. Yep, sure enough, that's where my wrapper ends. So I want my footer to actually go inside of the wrapper. Okay. Cool. And I could probably even style my footer because now it's not going to have any margins. It's going to be right up underneath my, the content box is there. So I could very easily just go into my code, add that in my style sheet. And let's make that guy have some margin top as well. We'll do 50 like we've been doing with everything else. All right, one more refresh. There we go. Cool. So that would be an example of like what this page would look like. Actually, obviously, I'm missing a hero banner there as well. I'm not going to worry about that. You guys know how to add a single div. But other than missing that one div, that's what I'd be expecting for this page for next week in terms of how it would be coded. Okay? Very, very straightforward. So hopefully that's a nice example to begin with. I am going to build out a few more examples here, though. Let's see, Chaz, I wrote down your name as well. I think on your sub page, I wanted to talk about that. So yeah, on the sub page here, we have an example very similar to what we just built. 2 columns, but one container is just bigger than the other. So let's talk about that. This is very, very easy to modify. We're potentially just dealing with column 1 and column 2. Column 1 in this case has a width of 400. Column 2 has a width of 400. We would just need to modify those. We can potentially make one of them 300, the other one 500. That would be one example of one being bigger than the other. Let's head back over here and refresh that again. And sure enough, one now is bigger than the other. Okay. Now, again, we can absolutely modify the these top margins, but that's how we would get one to be bigger than the other. An alternate to that, if you don't want to deal with hard numbers in terms of the width, you can absolutely set up percentages. So I could make like the width perhaps of this column 30%, and I could make the width of the other column 70%. And then Flexbox is going to do the math for you, figuring out what the actual pixel value of those should be. Okay. Now, do notice that it is, in that case, going all the way over to the edge. If you are using percentages like that, you are going to have to use some margin lefts to get them to get off of the direct edge, because that's using 50% of the total available space. Okay. So if we wanted to have some space on the left of those, we could certainly make that happen. Let's give that a save, test that out so you can see it. There we go. Cool. If we wanted a little bit of space over here, we would use a smaller percent number on this one, because 30 plus 70% is obviously 100%. So if we use something less than that, now we have a little bit of extra space. So by doing like 65%, you will see that now we've got, that's probably not enough. Let's maybe make that number a little bit bigger. I should say smaller. Let's maybe go like 50% on that. There we go. Cool. Now, again, those values are a little bit uneven because I've got left margins on those. So we could potentially, actually take those out now. Now that we're not equaling a total of 100%, again, Flexbox will figure out the extra space that we have. There we go. And align things for us pretty nicely. So percentages are an option. I am actually going to go, though, back to solid values on those. So I'm just undoing until I get back to having widths of locked down pixel values. So that's how you would do something like we saw in Chaz's, where there are different values. Let's talk about, there was another example. I don't know if it's next. We'll see here. It is in here, though, where we have alternating sizes as we go through these. It might be in Jasmine's. Let's see. There was something I did mark down Jasmine's to look at. So in Jasmine's case, we've got 3. That very much is the very first example that I built. And there it is. Yep, I had a feeling. So here we have alternating where we've got the image and the text swap positions as we go down. It really is just based on what we already have, just with a tweak to it. So instead of just repeating container 1 over and over and over again, maybe we make a new class called container 2. And maybe this is column, I'll say 2.1 and 2.2. You can use dashes like this. And you can use numbers in class names, guys, but the number cannot start the class name. Okay, I can't stress that enough. If I called this like 1 column like that, this would not work. Okay, but let's make a tweak here. So let's go into our style sheet. Let's copy container 1. Actually, realistically, I could just leave that exactly the way that it is. I could have just kept it as container 1 because I'm really not changing anything here. What I'm really changing would be these things and the way that they act, the columns inside. So let's go ahead and set up a example of those. So what did I call that? 2-1, 2-2. And we would just potentially just change those values. Here, in fact, let's just do this, 2.2, 2.1. So now I am just alternating the widths of those. Let's give that a look. There we go. So the first one has, small, big, big, small, small, big, and we can just keep alternating that right over and over and over again by just, adding another container 2, for example, underneath this column 1, and voila, and that just keeps stacking up like so. Okay. So obviously these are labeled incorrectly now. Don't necessarily worry about like what that says. We can obviously put anything in there. But yeah, that is how we would do something like that. So it seems, at first glance like a complicated thing, but it's really not. It's just a matter of setting up each of these rows individually, where the children columns are just having alternate and different widths. Let's see here. There is a few more. Let's see. Bella, I wrote down your name next. Let's see. I don't remember what was in there that I wanted to talk about. In this case, just these simple, two, multiple columns like this. So again, that would be an example of, let's do column 1, column 2. I'm going to actually take out this stuff, and we'll just do our container 1. So those columns are both the exact same size. Again, in Bella and yours here, both same size. Space in front of, in the middle, and after. So we can keep our justify content parameter the same. And if we save that and we test out in the browser, we get, oh, hang on a second, we gotta kill some of this code. I still have, oh, I didn't save my style. Let's save that real quick. Let's save the HTML real quick. And there we go. So that would be one of those. Bella, you have another set. So again, it would just be a matter of then taking that container 1, copying it, pasting a copy underneath itself, and there we go. Okay. So again, these things can just get stacked up very, very easily. Let's see here. I wrote down, Jen, I wrote down yours next. Let's see what was in here. Oh, okay. So a third one, we've got 3 columns here. The first one and the last one are the same size. The middle one is a different size. Again, just a variation of what we've already done here potentially. So this would be an example here. Let me get rid of this. This would be an example where we bring back in column 3. And then Jen, yours, I know that I haven't been changing these, but I'm aware of it at least this time. I'll change that real quick to say image. And let's kind of see where that starts us out with. Let's see here. Let's going on there with that big one? Okay, so we do have our 3 columns. I'm just surprised that that one is large like that. There's a parameter though in our style that we can take a look at. Column 1, 2. Let's go back to having 3. Oh, it didn't have a margin top like the others. So let's give it a quick margin top. But the difference here is that, you know, Jen, on yours, you have a small image. Pull your wireframe back up. You have a small image on for column 1 and column 3, and then column 2 is much bigger. So again, a few ways that we could potentially set this up. We could give column 1 and 3 a smaller number, and then column 2 a bigger number. Let's see if I can add up math-wise. Yes, it is. Okay. Let's refresh that. There we go. So that very much gets us where we'd want. And again, there is some space here in the front, and then in the middle, and then at the end. So that's how we would do something like that. Let's see. Kathy, yours is the last name I wrote down here. Let's take a look at that. I don't remember specifically. Let's just take a look. Oh, yeah, okay. So for something like this, so when we're dealing with lorem ipsum type, and it's all the exact amount of type, it looks pretty straightforward. And if it literally is the same amount of type for all of these could just be single individual, you know, containers that sit inside of the parent, just 1, 2, 3, like we've done over and over again. But if we are going to have different amount of type here for these, rather what we'd want to do potentially is set this up where each one of these are rows, so that we can ensure that they align correctly. Otherwise, if this one has, you know, a line of text that's more or less than the others, it's going to not align. Okay, so rather than me building that, I'm just going to download this real quick and kind of draw that in Photoshop, because it's just based on what we've been doing here all along. Although I don't know if I'm logged into Photoshop, and that might be a problem on this computer. I don't think I am. Let's try. Otherwise, that might be one I build for you guys live in class. We'll see. I'm worrying that this video is getting a little bit long at this point. So let's see. I mean, potentially I could actually build it out fairly fast. Yeah, let's do that, because I don't think I'm going to be logged in on this Photoshop, and I do not have that login sitting here next to me. Yep. All right. So let me build that real quick. It actually will not take long, because it's just pretty much copy and paste. So we're dealing with a 3-column layout. Okay. 1, 2, 3. And potentially 1, 2, 3 rows, you know, where the photos would go in one row, the text would be in the next one, the buttons would be in the next one. So potentially those are all even looking in terms of their width. So we'll do something like this. That starts us out with that. And here in yours, Kathy, you'd be looking at having, what do we have? It was, I believe, image. Yeah, image type buttons. So in my code, just as placeholders, we'll go ahead and type image, image, image. Okay. And I could literally just copy this chunk, this container, parent container of its children. In this case, this would be text and text and text. And we could do one more with buttons. Let's see, a little bit more copy pasty, and we get there. And there we go. Now, obviously, the margin tops on these are a little bit excessive for what you had, Kathy, in yours. This is, you know, considerably less. I feel like the top margin here might be like 20, or I don't know. Certainly a lot less than 50, what I had. So again, we can modify that pretty easily. Let's do 20s on those. Okay. The other thing, guys, to keep in mind with this is that these divs I've got all set up here all have that border. In your actual final version of your project, you wouldn't have that. That is just, again, so we can see things, but there we go. So now those are a little bit tighter. I actually think on the columns as well, the containers, I have got a margin top as well. Yep, there it is. There's that 50, and that's causing all of that space. Let's maybe shrink that down a little bit. One last refresh. There we go. Cool. So that's how that would set up. Now, again, looks a little bit goofy right now without actual images and text and buttons in there. And, you know, maybe on these buttons, we take the margin top off all the way. That's obviously a possibility to do something like that. We could just give each of these, you know, they're all based on the class container 1 right now. We could create additional classes, you know, container 2 or container 3, and really have individual margin tops on there if we want. But I hope that that acts as a really good primer to kind of demystify how Flexbox works. You know, watch this video as many times as you guys need to. And as always, as you're working on this, don't hesitate to email me if you have any questions. But for this next portion of the project, very similarly to when we did project 1, you're going to code out your HTML wireframes, style them with CSS, and this is what they're going to look like. They're not going to be very tall at all. We're not dealing with any heights. I cannot stress that enough. No heights on these things. The heights will be driven by the content themselves. Okay. So a lot of folks get confused and they think it's just too incomplete looking and that you need to do more. This is what you know, this page potentially would look like at this point. Okay. So we're going to do this for our homepage. We're going to do it for our sub pages, and that's going to set us up then to actually start plugging in the actual content. All right. All right, guys. And then one more time, don't forget that there is that more comprehensive video that walks through every single aspect of Flexbox, but I actually really firmly believe that just those elements that I showed you today are really all that you need for it. So that is it. I will see you guys in class.